Hello, everyone. My name is Brenisen and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Community Education and Outreach Manager at Women's Advocates. Today, we'll be discussing the fundamentals of domestic violence. And before we begin, I would like to share a bit more about Women's Advocates as an organization. Women's Advocates is a nonprofit organization in St. Paul, Minnesota that offers a continuum of safety through our prevention programming like these webinars, emergency shelter and advocacy services, and housing stability services for victim survivors of domestic violence. We began in the early 1970s as a legal advice helpline that supported particularly women at the time who were seeking divorce and legal name change. On the helpline, the legal personnel found that many of these women were faced at a crossroads and having to decide between experiencing abuse in their home or being homeless on the streets by themselves or with their children. They wanted to create a third option for people who were in this position. And by 1974, they'd rallied enough money to purchase our first safe home to shelter people who have experienced abuse, particularly women and children at the time. In the almost 50 years since, we've expanded our shelter and it is now 3 interconnected homes. And we have updated our mission statement to better reflect what it is we believe we do, which is to walk with victim survivors and our community to break the cycle of domestic violence. You can learn more about our organization at wadvocates.org. Women's Advocates has also recently worked on developing our own land acknowledgement, and we just presented it to the community yesterday at our donor appreciation event, where we took a significant step in supporting and centering Native and Indigenous individuals in our community who showcased their traditional dances, drumming, cooking, and artwork at this event. We will always share this land acknowledgement at the top of our webinars, so I will do so now. Women's Advocates' work takes place on Dakota land. The area that is now St. Paul was stolen from the Dakota people by the American government through centuries of wars, broken treaties, and acts of cultural genocide. Through incredible perseverance and resistance, the Dakota are still here and strong. Native women and girls face the highest risk of domestic violence, sexual assault, and intimate partner homicide. We express our gratitude for the Indigenous-led organizations who are working each day towards a world without domestic and sexual violence. And as an organization, we commit ourselves to supporting tribal sovereignty with the same fervor that we support the self-sovereignty of victim survivors. You can read our full acknowledgement on our website. I will go ahead and put that in the chat as well too. And we will continue with today's webinar. So we'll start with a quick 90-second poll. It's multiple choice, so you can select as many as applies to you about what has brought you here to this training today and what specifically you're hoping to learn about. On the screen, you'll see that this training is divided into 2 parts. So first, we'll explore the fundamental dynamics and the impacts of abuse, and then we'll close with everyday ways that we can support victim survivors of domestic violence. And keep a note that this information can apply to supporting people who have experienced interpersonal trauma in general as well. I also wanted to acknowledge that everyone is impacted differently by engaging with this topic, and I encourage you all to take care of yourselves however you need during and after the webinar. So give about 20 more seconds for you all to fill out the poll if you would like. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll in about 10 seconds here. All right, I will share the results. So it looks like an overwhelming majority of us are attending this webinar because we want to learn more about how to support survivors in a professional capacity. And then others say that they're not as familiar with domestic violence and they want to understand it better. And then we have a couple others in the other categories as well in terms of helping a friend, family member, coworker, as well as a few who want to brush up on recent education and others who think that they have experienced abuse themselves and they want to learn more. So we're really grateful to have all of you here today. And one last disclaimer. So just a disclaimer to participants of our Domestic Violence 101. This also, if you've attended them in the past, this will be the same content. So if you want to click away, that's totally fine. But this is basically the same content if you've attended our TV 101s in the past. But we kind of like to remind everyone that this is a fundamental webinar. We can have multiple courses that last a lifetime in attempt to cover everything related to domestic violence, but today's purpose is to engage you all in hopefully a collaborative discussion about survivor-centered ways of understanding abuse, how it happens, what early signs of abuse can look and feel like, how prevalent abuse is, and the ways it can impact a survivor and the ways that can present as well. So we want to make sure you all leave here today with tangible resources, skills, and knowledge to support survivors and help shift our culture to one of respect, consent, and accountability. And if you want to learn more about specific subtopics, we have over 50 detailed webinars on our YouTube channel, so we recommend checking that out if you're interested. And the link is on the screen. You can also type Women's Advocates into the search bar on YouTube. So we'll go ahead and start with understanding the fundamental dynamics of abuse. So again, whether we're here because we work with survivors or perpetrators, are survivors ourselves, or because we just learned that domestic violence exists, we're all kind of coming into this webinar with some idea of what domestic violence is and some automatic associations that our brains make with the term. So what do you think when you hear domestic violence? Please put it in the chat. What words do you associate with domestic violence? Who and what do you picture? What actions, images, or words? What kind of relationship? You can put your immediate thoughts in the chat. Don't worry about whether I would consider them right or wrong. We'll get into a shared definition later. But when you do kind of put in words in the chat, please include what you saw or how you learned about those thoughts or those views. Someone in the chat is putting violence between partners and family members is what they immediately think of. You can continue to put some more answers in the chat. The goal for us is to have an awareness about our current immediate associations with abuse and potentially assumptions that we make as well. And so one of our goals in this webinar is that if you were to answer this prompt again at the end, that your responses may be slightly more expanded and nuanced than they are right now. Other people in the chat are saying they think of physical abuse from intimate partners right away. Physical and mental abuse between couples is another in the chat. We'll give about one more minute in case people want to add any other thoughts that they'd like to share about their current understanding or immediate association. So a lot of people are talking about romantic or intimate relationships. A specific type of abuse, they think of physical and mental. And then we haven't had any responses yet to where we've seen or learned. And I would imagine many of you may be thinking about the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case, which is a lot, and we won't have time to unpack that today. So I will put some resources in the chat if you do want to learn more about the discourse, about that, some articles that you can check out here. So I'll go ahead and put those in the chat. But some people are mentioning, yeah, movies, TV, and being exposed to it that way. And many of us may be coming to this webinar with personal experiences as well. Okay, so we'll continue to expand upon your current associations, and one way is just kind of to use this tool as a visualization here. So Women's Advocates is located in the state of Minnesota. And so in Minnesota, there's a target field where they play baseball. And I remember when I went to the target field for the first time, I was genuinely in awe of how many people could fit into one space, and realizing that a study found that the field could be filled 17 times with just the women, so not all survivors, in the state of Minnesota alone who have experienced sexual and or domestic violence, and those are included side by side because often survivors experience both from either the same person or throughout their lifetime. It can be really daunting to imagine this giant space being filled 17 times, and it really demonstrates how widespread this experience of abuse is and how these survivors are not alone. Continuing to highlight this point are all of these statistics on the screen. I won't read them out to you, but with domestic violence affecting 1 in 4 Minnesota women, and more generally speaking, 1 in 3 individuals in the world, it is statistically very likely that you have worked with, lived with, studied with, shared public transportation with someone who has experienced abuse and someone who has used abuse in their relationships as well. You also might be someone who has experienced abuse yourself. It's not uncommon for people to realize during these presentations that they have experienced abuse, but they never called it that. And that's because they thought the term was reserved for quote unquote other people, or for people who have had it worse, or that it simply doesn't happen to people like them. But domestic violence impacts everyone, regardless of their identities. And the statistic that 1 in 3 homeless women in Minnesota are homeless, at least in part because of domestic violence, highlights the importance of shelters like women's advocates that prioritize housing stability for survivors. Something that a lot of us are not taught when we're children is that all relationships exist on a spectrum. So this spectrum spans from healthy to unhealthy and unhealthy to abusive. But when we're growing up and observing relationships, our brains simply conclude how my parents or other adults in my life, how they treat each other is what it means to be in a relationship. We don't label it as abusive or unhealthy or healthy. Some kids do, but oftentimes we don't. And these actions just become what is familiar and what is normal to us, which informs our thinking and our behaviors when we enter relationships of our own. And sometimes it can be hard to distinguish unhealthy relationship dynamics from genuinely abusive ones. And you'll see the arrows indicating that, again, it's a continuum and not necessarily static. Various behaviors within the same relationship can fall under every category as well too. So it's important for us to understand context, dynamics, and impact to assess the nature of a relationship. So we'll dive a bit more into the abusive side of the continuum. So domestic violence is not just a thrown remote or a hole in the drywall or a single black eye or things that you may have seen depicted in the media. Domestic violence is a 24/7 pattern. It's designed to exert control. The key word here is control over another person, to exercise power in a way that makes the other person be in a constant state of feeling small, afraid, and unsafe. It involves using every tactic on the table to make the other person's world smaller and more hostile. In 1970s, when our organization was founded, and there were very concrete efforts to raise public consciousness and awareness about abuse that was happening in people's homes. These different methods of exerting power control were then documented by a psychologist, Dr. Ellen Pence, who interviewed hundreds of survivors, particularly women at the time, and found common experiences among them, including isolation, intimidation, denying, minimizing, and blaming. Many of these tactics people did not previously associate with abuse. And since the 70s, our understanding of dynamics of abuse has evolved, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. More than physical assault, which can but doesn't always happen in abusive relationships, domestic violence is a form of psychological terrorism. It doesn't have to be a romantic or sexual relationship either. Domestic violence can occur between family members, including aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, other people who live in the home. They can also perpetrate domestic violence. And so these people often know the target of their abuse in a very intimate and personal way compared to harm from a stranger, from someone who doesn't know the unique and sometimes subtle ways that can hurt a specific person. And some of these subtleties can snowball into what we know as coercive control. You can learn more about it. There's lots of books and studies out there on it, but we also have a whole webinar that explores the term further on our YouTube channel. So you should be able to find it there as well. So I mentioned not too long ago, just a moment ago, that our field's understanding of the dynamics and impacts of domestic violence have evolved since Dr. Helen Pence conceptualized the power and control wheel in the 70s. This is also true of the language that we use to describe those who experience and those who perpetrate domestic violence. And so this is a chart from the Northwest Network that does an excellent job of displaying the shift in language that we use in different systems. So on the right, you'll see the legal system model that has been used for many years and is often continued to be used. It refers to victim and perpetrator to describe who's experiencing or enacting the violence. And this model often excludes many survivor experiences. It can minimize the impact of abuse and limits it to the confines of what is deemed illegal, rather than seeking to understand the reality and the nuances of experiencing abuse the way that the anti-violence advocacy model that you see on the left does. So the anti-violence advocacy model recognizes that domestic violence is not a singular event. The singular event is something that the legal system can choose to punish or not, but we know that domestic violence is a pattern of power and control. And so you can kind of look through these tables, and then we also included a link on the slide if you want to read through kind of more of the development of understanding these two models and how we can encourage you all to utilize the anti-violence advocacy model in the work that you do with survivors. Speaking to the abusive tactics, many of which are perfectly legal, but can be extremely harmful. We have 8 warning signs. The first 4 on the screen are social isolation, harmful criticism, constant blame, and harmful anger. So I'm going to launch another 90-second poll. It's a single choice poll. Learn more about which of the 4 you think are the most challenging to identify early on in the relationship. I'll give you all about 30 more seconds to fill out the poll. And I would like for you to maybe start to think about why you think this is. Why do you think the warning sign that you chose is the most challenging to identify early on in the relationship? And you can put that in the chat as well too. Put any kind of reasoning behind why you chose what you chose. Any other thoughts kind of related to this? I'd love to hear it. I'll go ahead and end the poll here and share the results. So 66% of people who responded to the poll said that social isolation is what they think is the most challenging to identify early on in a relationship. 22% said harmful criticism, and 13% said constant blame. So we'll kind of start with social isolation. So for those of you who put social isolation, you can put in the chat maybe a little bit of why you think that is and maybe observations that you have made. But just to give an example of what social isolation can sound like, this is just one example, is do you really need to see your family again this weekend? To feel close to you, I really need to have as much one-on-one time as possible. You don't need to talk to your friends as much as you do. The goal of social isolation is often to be the only voice that the survivor hears, to be their only source of support. And so oftentimes, abusive people will know that if the survivor has a strong support system and more people are aware of what's going on in their relationship and they're talking to other people about the things that the abusive person says and does, that leaves them really privy to other people to say, hey, this is kind of concerning me. I'm really concerned for your well-being, or this is not right, or you deserve better. But the more that they isolate the survivor from those opposing voices, the abusive person's voice often becomes the one that they hear the loudest, or maybe the only voice, or replaces their own voice. And they might find themselves saying, oh, I really need to spend more time with my partner. But it's not because they want to spend more time with their partner, but it's because the abusive partner is telling them that that is what they need to do, right? And so in the chat, people are saying that many see excessive attention as a sign of love or interest, right? So that example that I said, that's on the screen, some people might say, oh, wow, that's really sweet. Like, my partner wants to spend as much time with me as possible. And that they just want to spend time with me, and that concern can be minimized. Other people in the chat are saying that social isolation can come up as being excited in a new relationship. We often hear about the honeymoon phase. Yeah, with the first couple of months, maybe all they want to do is spend time with the person that they're developing a relationship with, and they can maybe not think anything of it and just really normalize that and say, oh, that's pretty standard for a relationship. Others are saying it's hard to tell how isolated someone is because you're not with them most of the time. That's another reason too why that might be hard for someone else to pick up on a warning sign that someone that they know is experiencing social isolation, because they're like, oh, it's usual for me to see them only a couple times a year, and they're not privy to how an abusive person might be the one kind of influencing that. Yeah, other people are reiterating that you might not realize it's happening because it's really common to spend a lot of time with someone. And so we've heard from survivors too that, it won't be for a couple of months and they might realize, wow, I haven't seen my family in like 6 months and I normally see them every other week. And so it might take some more time to become more aware of that warning sign for sure. And seeing where all that's coming from. But that is something we hear so commonly, is like, oh, your parents don't get us, or oh, your friends aren't supportive of us, you need to cut them off, and just kind of being controlling about who they can and can't spend their time with. And it becomes a very much like us versus them mentality, and putting a survivor in a position where they have to choose between their friends or choose their partner as a way of potentially proving their love or proving their loyalty. And then the other one that people put was harmful criticism. So anyone in the chat who put harmful criticism, would love to hear about why you think that might be difficult to identify early on. So an example of harmful criticism, it can sound like, you're not really as smart as you think you are. You talk so passionately about things you think you understand, but it actually just reveals how dumb you are. That's why you need me. So the goal of harmful criticism is to degrade and diminish the survivor's self-esteem, so they believe they deserve what they're experiencing or that nothing better exists for them. And so That might be surprising to some people to be like, oh, it'd be so obvious if someone was harmfully criticizing me all the time, I wouldn't be with them. But it can be really insidious, the same thing as like the social isolation, where it can come off as, oh, I care about you. I want the best for you. Like, don't you want to be with someone who pushes you to grow and improve? But really it's doing it in a way that is trying to diminish their self-esteem. Some people will say, oh, assume it meant to be a joke, right? Just kind of brush it off and be like, oh, this is this person's personality. Oh, this is, like the idea of like roasting or like playfully criticizing someone. But the person who's experiencing that criticism gets to decide if it's harmful or not. And if it's brought up and you ask, hey, please don't say these things, it hurts my feelings, and they continue to do it, then we're entering that category, that territory of unhealthy or potentially abusive, depending on the situation as well. So I won't go through the other two for time reasons, but I encourage you to think about constant blame and harmful anger as well too as warning signs that you might observe in people that you're working with or other people in your lives as well. So to introduce the next four warning signs, so these are manipulative jealousy, excessive control, intentional sabotage, and strategic intensity. So I'm going to launch one more single choice poll, and the question is, which of the four do you think are most often normalized by society? So which warning sign have you seen brushed off as not a big deal, or maybe depicted as even a genuine sign of care or sweetness? I'll give about 30 more seconds here, reflecting on which warning sign do you think is the most normalized by society. Great. I will go ahead and share the results. So it looks like 55% of us say manipulative jealousy is most often normalized by society, and 29% say strategic intensity. So with that on the screen, manipulative jealousy can sound like, I saw you talking to that guy at work. You can't talk to other people. You're giving them the wrong idea. And if you really cared about me, you wouldn't go out of your way to engage with him. You need to remove him from your contacts. So the goal of manipulative jealousy is often to establish ownership over the survivor. So to ensure that the survivor knows that the abusive person feels owed all of the survivor's attention, time, energy, and to also control who they can and cannot talk to or be around, like the person did in this example here, to make accusations of the survivor that are often really just reflections of the abusive person's insecurities. So for people who put manipulative jealousy in the chat, what are examples or what kind of led you to think that it's really normalized by society? What have we seen in the media or in our own lives that has kind of informed that being manipulatively jealous can be loving or can be just a part of being in a relationship? And one thing I want to make super clear too is the word manipulative here is really important. I think that it can be healthy and normal to experience jealousy, and it's what you do with that, right? So it's your response to experiencing jealousy. Do you use that feeling to try to control other people's behaviors, give them ultimatums, and kind of dictate their life? Or do you respond to your jealousy and saying, oh, you talking to that person kind of made me jealous, but I just really care about you and I trust you. If you say that nothing is going on between you and this person, like that, those are two very different situations where jealousy is present. So I think that context can be really important, and it kind of analyzing whether it's a warning sign or not. But I think that can be romanticized a lot too. I've definitely seen depicted in the media all the time of like, oh, like questioning if someone actually cares about someone if they don't get jealous, or just having an expectation of, oh, someone in the past would make me delete this person on social media or delete them from my contacts. And the fact that you're not doing that makes me wonder if you actually care about me. Someone in the chat is saying an example would be, don't go out with your friends, stay with me. If you care about me, you would stay. Don't you love me? What kind of partner are you? Don't you care about us? Or you don't care about us. Sorry about that. Not as well as I could have. But that's a great example as well too. And that is something that can form into that social isolation too, of like, because of manipulative jealousy and they put that ultimatum of the us versus them mentality, they're put in the situation where we've heard from survivors like, I just stopped even trying to go out. Like, I stopped trying to see my friends. I stopped trying to do things because every time I did, I'd get my loyalty, my character, everything questioned, and I just don't want to hear it anymore. And so that is a really great example of someone put in the chat. Another person in the chat said jealousy is often portrayed as a partner caring about you in the relationship, but it can be controlling and a lack of trust. Yeah, absolutely. I think that can be romanticized a lot, and especially even like physical altercations of like, oh, if someone hits on me, I expect you to harm them physically or physically threaten them. And that shows that you care about me and that you respect me. But that might not be the case for everyone, right? Of like, you can ask someone to speak to that person respectfully and ask them to apologize for their behavior, but resorting to physical threats or physical assault might not fall in the category of healthy, right? Of a healthy response to experiencing jealousy. And then the other one that people said was strategic intensity. So example of strategic intensity is, I've never met anyone like you before. I think you're my soulmate. That's why I send you so many flowers at work and want to talk to you all the time. I want to meet your parents, and I think we should spend most of our nights together. So the goal of strategic intensity is to entrap the survivor quickly, right? To manipulate the survivor into ignoring their gut or warnings from their friends to justify their questionable actions with love, and to progress the relationship to a point where the survivor feels like they're in too deep to back away, or to create a positive period of time that the survivor would hold on to for hope when the abusive person's true nature is revealed. And so for those of you who put strategic intensity as something that's really normalized, you can put that in the chat too. I know a lot of people might think of love bombing. That's been a term that's gained more popularity and awareness of this strategy. Instead of focusing on creating a connection with someone, they're just kind of bombarding them with these really sweeping statements of like, yeah, you're my soulmate. We just met last week, or I feel like I've known you my whole life. Like, those things get glorified. And again, those things alone without context don't inherently mean that there's abuse. But again, I think that that's something we see in fairy tales, we see in Disney movies, we see all the time of moving in together after knowing each other for a couple of weeks, or just progressing at a very fast rate that might feel too fast for the other person, but they do care and they do like that other person, so they go along with it. But that's something too that we hear a lot of. A turning point too is once there's marriage, moving in, or there's a child involved, sometimes abusive behaviors get ramped up because the abusive person feels secure in that, oh, this person's not going to leave me, so I can do whatever they want. And so that is something that we often hear a lot as well too. And at that point, sometimes survivors fall into a lot of self-blame and a lot of like internalized like victim blaming of, I made my bed, so now I have to lay in it, and like all of these things where they kick themselves because they feel like they should have known sooner, they should have known better, they never thought they'd be in this situation. And That's something that is very commonly experienced if strategic intensity is involved in an abusive relationship. Any other thoughts about these? You can put them in the chat. Someone in the chat said, I saw someone do this at work before, sending someone constant big gifts, wanting them to move in right away, go away with them. Too many people didn't see it as a flag like I did, and it turns out that person was abusive. Yeah, that is not an uncommon story at all. And again, sending flowers here and there can not raise flags. But again, that's something that oftentimes people might do is after causing harm and being abusive, they might say, oh, I apologize. Here's all these gifts. You have to forgive me. This is proof that I love you. I didn't mean it. Don't hold it against me. And yeah, again, a lot of it can be romanticized. So thank you for sharing that very real life example too. Okay. So we will continue on to a few more warning signs. So just as we talked about in the last two slides, these warning signs can sometimes be difficult to identify, as we've talked about, especially when we are the ones experiencing them, or if we're looking in from the outside. Sometimes we don't know the names for what we're experiencing. So all of those things, the 8 that I just talked about, we might not say, oh, my friend's experiencing strategic intensity. They might say, oh, my friend's relationship is moving really fast and I'm kind of concerned. And so that's when specific questions on the screen, like, does someone that you love tell you that you never do anything right? These are kind of questions that get a more direct way of understanding someone's experiences and the behaviors of the other person without directly asking, do they constantly blame you, or using those terms that they might not be aware of, because the abusive person might gaslight them and make it seem like the survivor is the one blaming the abusive person. And so it can be tough to ask people that you're concerned about these questions. And a useful tool could be the relationship quiz by Love is Respect. It's on the screen here. This can be a helpful way of allowing survivors to choose their own answers to the quiz themselves and to think more about the nature of their relationships. And sometimes getting this perspective from an external third party, and the results might say, there's a potential that you're experiencing abuse in your relationship because of these responses that you put. This is really common for people who are experiencing abuse. That can be something that survivors are more receptive to, or it can start to begin the process of them realizing that they're not alone and that they're not crazy and that their experiences and their emotions associated with it are valid. Has anyone used that relationship quiz in the past? I'm just curious. You can put like a simple yes or no in the chat if you'd like. Okay, people are saying no, they haven't. Yeah, I would recommend you check it out if you would like. I'll put it in the chat super quick. I will put the link out. There's a bunch of different quizzes that they have on this site, so I will put that in the chat as well. All right. So speaking of feeling crazy, that is often a sign of emotional abuse. So let's watch this 4-minute video outlining the 4 signs of emotional abuse. So I will make sure the subtitles are on.
Emotional abuse can be incredibly damaging, increasing a person's chances of developing depression and anxiety, sometimes for decades after the fact. Broadly speaking, emotional abuse involves one person controlling another by undermining their sense of self-worth and personal agency. But emotionally abusive behaviors can be subtle and difficult to spot, both from within and outside the abusive relationship. That's partly because emotional abuse often exploits or creates power imbalances between individuals, especially in relationships where safety, care, and trust are supposed to be guaranteed. Like the relationship between a caregiver and a child, healthcare provider and patient, teacher and student, or intimate partners. It's especially insidious because it often makes people doubt their perceptions of their own mistreatment. So let's walk through some of the most common signs of emotional abuse to make these behaviors and patterns easier to spot in real life. First, the content of someone's words. Criticism that's out of proportion to a situation, excessively harsh or personal, or makes sweeping generalizations or baseless negative predictions for the future is a warning sign of emotional abuse. Statements like, "You always make such stupid decisions," "You never do anything right," and "Nobody else will ever love you," aren't constructive, they're never warranted, and someone's use of them is a red flag. Second, tone and nonverbal cues. Yelling, ignoring, and showing contempt through body language are all ways to degrade someone. Dismissive behaviors like eye-rolling, glaring, or refusal to make eye contact, along with refusing to speak to someone or acknowledge their presence, sometimes called the silent treatment, can all feature in patterns of emotional abuse. These behaviors can painfully transform the meaning of spoken statements that might otherwise seem benign. Third, how someone reacts to being told they've said or done something hurtful can give important insight. Do they apologize sincerely and act differently in the future? Or do they dismiss and minimize the pain they've caused? It's common for abusers to try to undermine their target's perceptions of events. This is sometimes referred to as gaslighting, following up demeaning, humiliating, or threatening remarks with comments that dismiss the impact of those remarks, like, "I'm just trying to help you improve yourself. You should be grateful." Or, "It's really you that's selfish and manipulative. You're hurting me," are examples of this behavior. Lastly, when someone directs any of these behaviors at you, take note of whether this is part of a pattern of behavior from them. A one-time incident of name-calling or a demeaning insult might not be emotional abuse, while repetition over time can have a much more serious impact. Both frequency, how often these behaviors occur in a given period of time, and duration, how long they last, whether days or years, can contribute to the severity of the abuse. It's also important to remember that abusers rarely engage in abusive behaviors 100% of the time. Moments of kindness or calm don't invalidate moments of abuse, but are actually part of the cycle of emotional manipulation. So what can you do if you think you or someone you care about is experiencing emotional abuse? Maintaining interpersonal ties with people other than the abuser is crucial, as abusers often try to isolate their targets from others close to them. If you think you might be experiencing emotional abuse, consider sharing your experiences with a trusted friend or relative to get outside support. Or you can seek local or national confidential advocacy centres that can provide helpful resources. And if you think someone you know is being emotionally abused, check in with them. Let them know you're thinking of them and that you're ready to listen whenever they'd like to share. While emotional abusers may convince people that they deserve to be mistreated, nobody does. Everyone deserves kindness and respect.
Has anyone seen that video before? You can put in the chat. I see I have not. Yeah, any thoughts about that video you can put in the chat. It's created by someone we actually partner with a lot, Dr. Vian Wen Feng. She's at the Mind Body Trauma Care Lab over in University of Minnesota Duluth. And so she helped put that video together, and I think it does a really excellent job of describing the basic dynamics of emotional abuse that often underpin and interact with other forms of abuse. So again, domestic violence is not limited to physical assault, and it doesn't always involve physical abuse. And even then, physical abuse is not limited to only skin-to-skin contact. And so for this next multiple choice poll, I'm curious of which of the following forms of abuse you would like to learn more about. And so for the sake of time, we'll only get into maybe the top 2 or 3 forms that people say, but please know that each of the headings has a corresponding web link where you can learn more about each form. So once you have the PDF of the slides, you can go ahead and click that to learn more. But we'll just pick the top 2 or 3. All right, I'll go ahead and close out the poll in 20 seconds here. A few folks are sneaking in some more answers. All right, I'll go ahead and share the results. So it looks like, oh wow, very close. So it looks like 35% want to talk about digital, another 35% want to talk about social abuse, and another 32% want to talk about legal abuse. All right, so then stop sharing that. So let's pick one. So people want to learn more about. Let's start with which one is on this slide. I think they're all on this next one. So for social abuse, so we've talked a little bit about that earlier when we were talking about more warning signs, but social abuse is a behavior that aims to cut someone off from their family, from their friends, from the community. It can also include that person trying to damage that person's relationships with others. So people who are socially abusive might attempt to make the survivor look bad or to ruin their reputation. It can also include things done, in the home, in public, over the phone, over the internet, social media. So there's a lot of different examples. So again, we've talked about stopping you from seeing friends or family, not allowing you outside the home, outside of a room, or maybe even accommodation facility. So not allowing the survivor to participate in social and community events. So again, when people hear not allow, people are like, what does that mean? Again, it can be similar to what someone shared in the chat earlier. Someone makes a big fight and makes it so tough for them to go and do things that they resign themselves to not going. Or they can be really manipulative into making them not go. So it's not just saying you can't go to that. Oftentimes it's more nuanced than that. It can also be needing to know everywhere you have been or going. So we've definitely worked with survivors where they've also experienced, where they've been encouraged to go out and hang out with their friends, but then they're getting berated, they're getting harassed through text messages and calls the whole time that they're out. So they can't even enjoy their time. So in the next time they get invited, they say no because they don't want to experience that again. Maybe they ask that, I have to know everyone that you see, everything that you're planning to do, text me before and after you leave, every time you're in your car, tell me where you're going. Maybe they deliberately do things, which is aligned with that sabotage, but deliberately doing things to make the survivor miss or be late for events or appointments or meetings, maybe restricting access to car or transport or mobility, things that a lot of people associate with having that personal autonomy and freedom. The other one people wanted to know about was digital abuse. And so that is the use of technologies like texting, social media to bully, harass, stalk, or intimidate a partner. And so this is something that's often a form of verbal or emotional abuse as well too. And it's conducted online. And so all communication in a healthy relationship is respectful, whether it's in person, online, or over the phone. And so again, as we know, it's It's not okay for a partner to use words or actions to harm another person, their self-esteem, or to manipulate them. So this is something that we hear a lot of from like former partners. So, because domestic violence can happen from like, it's often something that happens within the relationship, but oftentimes after the person has left. So, if someone's broken up, this is from an ex, and they're constantly sending insulting or threatening messages. Maybe they're using social media to track you. Maybe they start stalking you. Maybe they post insulting and defaming things online. Maybe they constantly text you, making you feel like you can't be separated from your phone. Maybe they look through your phone. They check up on your pictures, texts, phone records. Maybe they install an app that mirrors everything that happens on your phone. So it's very invasive. And so anything kind of involving technology, which I know a lot of us might walk around and we are glued to our phones. Our phones are always with us, whether it's for safety reasons in case something happens, or just a habit as well to be reachable. It also means that someone doesn't even need to be in person to cause harm and to be abusive. And the last one I want to touch on super quick is legal abuse. This is a huge one. So this is also known as abusive litigation. It can involve filing protective orders, starting custody battles, describing the individual as an unfit parent, if that's involved. Maybe they're filing unnecessary motions that force the survivor back into court. And we know that court isn't often a very trauma-informed environment. It is oftentimes very re-traumatizing, where people are doubting them, people are minimizing them, people are blaming them for what they've experienced, and it can be really triggering for people to have to go through that. And so sometimes they use the court's discovery process to bring up humiliating or personal information in front of a public audience. Maybe the abusive person refuses to obey court orders or protective orders. We know that protective orders are not a guarantee. It requires the abusive person to respect the order, and also for law enforcement to enforce that order, if and act on it if it does get violated. And so there's this quote that I read about kind of what describes abusive litigation. And so this person says, the most horrible sufferings have not been only physical, but they've been emotional, psychological, and financial. My abuser never stops harassing me. The courts are my abuser's playgrounds. The courts are used to inflict suffering, and my abuser constantly, and I do mean constantly, has me in court. And so the abuser's lawyer helps the abuser wear us out, wants to inflict as much suffering as possible, and the court itself enables this person to do so. The end is never coming, it never ends. So that can be something too that people experience ongoing after trying to leave an abusive relationship as well. And so those are some of the examples of the forms that you all indicated in the poll that you want to learn a bit more about. Again, once you get the slides, you can click on the links and learn more about these other forms if I didn't answer any questions that you had. But just a reminder that all of the different forms of abuse on these 2 slides are aimed toward gaining power and control over the other person and taking away their sense of agency. So when I say agency, it means a person's capacity to act independently and make their own free choices. And we have a lot of webinars that dive into these specifically for another 90 minutes. So you're welcome to check those out if you're interested. So there is sometimes a disproportionate focus on the person who experiences abuse. We talk about survivor this, victims that, which is great. But sometimes we're not really seeking to understand and recognize the people who are being abusive. And when we do this, when we start to seek to understand, we can start the important work of accountability. So we saw some of these traits in the warning signs slide, so intensity, jealousy, blaming, but there's more, right? So looking through the collage of traits, maybe just think of if any surprise you, if you would add any additional traits or emphasize any of the ones that you see. And we also want to be clear that not every abusive person is going to exhibit all of these traits. And not everyone who exhibits some of these traits is an abusive person. Because abuse is a choice, right? Even the most manipulative or vengeful person has the ability to decide whether they use their tactics for good or for abuse. And some people are really surprised that charming people are often successful, hold positions of power in the community that can include religious leaders, political leaders, any other highly esteemed individuals in various communities. They choose to use abuse. Many people who already hold power, right? They have the mentality that no one's going to believe that they're capable of causing harm, or that causing harm is something that they can get away with and use to get what they want simply because they can. Someone in the chat said, are these traits learned or with them naturally? So I think with these are just common traits that we've observed in people who do use abuse, but again, abusive behavior is learned. Some of these things people could argue are within someone's nature, but I am of the belief that this is something that they maybe either demonstrated in the media, or that they've learned from people in their family. Maybe, you know, if I'm a daughter, maybe I act in the similar way as my mother did, or another parent or adult figure in my life. And that might have me kind of take on these different traits. But I wouldn't say that because people aren't born abusive, right? People aren't inherently born with this quality to need to control other people, right? And so that's something that is learned through a multitude of social and societal forces as well too. And so these are ones that we commonly see in people who do use abusive behavior. So thank you for that question. Hopefully that answers it. So for the sake of time, we'll kind of continue on with the presentation. And a lot of you mentioned that you want to support people within a professional capacity. And so when you're thinking about the people that you work with, what are the identities of the people that abusive individuals often target? So whether we're aware of it or not, we all have an image in our heads of what a survivor looks like. It's what fuels comments like, but you don't look like a victim, or I didn't think people like you experienced abuse, or but you're so intelligent and independent. We know for a fact that the vast majority of victims of domestic violence are women, and the vast majority of perpetrators are men. Again, that is not to say that men and non-binary people, gender non-conforming, don't ever experience abuse. They do. Or that women never perpetrate abuse. Again, they do. But it's really important to recognize this overwhelming sex and gender disparity. And Rachel Louise Snyder, in her book No Visible Bruises, mentions Hamish Sinclair. So he's one of the first people to implement an intervention program for abusers. And he's unapologetic in his research about the gender specifics here. So he says it is men who are violent, it is men who perpetrate the majority of the world's violence, whether that is domestic abuse or war. Even those relatively few women who are violent, he says, are most often violent in response to men's violence. Women kill or hurt in self-defense. If we ignore the source of the problem, refuse to name domestic violence as a form of male violence, then we lose out on the ability to solve it. We also need to recognize that survivors hold multiple identities outside of gender and sex, right? So one of these includes ethnicity. So on the chart on the left, you can interpret that data as 48% of American Indian Alaska Native women will experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime. And these individuals experience intimate partner violence at the highest and at a very, very alarming rate. And oftentimes they're experiencing abuse from people who do not share their same ethnicity. And on the right chart, you'll see, or the chart on the right of your screen, you'll see that 66% of women with disabilities have experienced domestic violence, and 61% of bisexual women have experienced domestic violence, and 30.9% of all men have experienced domestic violence. And so these three statistics start to provide evidence contrary to the common belief that these populations can't and don't experience abuse. And today, well, not today, this month is Pride Month, and we are going to have some more webinars that talk about understanding domestic violence within the LGBTQI2S+ community. And so I encourage you all to attend those webinars if you want to learn more about about it. And we're also going to have another one about promoting safety and starting to work towards prevention and healthy relationships within LGBTQIA2S plus communities as well. So stay tuned for that. But this is a little precursor. Again, not only do survivors hold multiple identities. Sorry, I was noticing the transition with the interpreters. I wanted to pause. I was getting really heated. Okay. Survivors also exist and have to navigate their way through multiple intersecting systems and forms of oppression. So from classism to racism to ageism to ableism, heterosexism to discrimination due to immigration status. So I'd like you to think about the identities that the people you work with, that you interact with, what they hold. How are those identities different from yours? How do these intersecting forms of oppression impact their lives and their experiences of abuse, and also their ability to navigate legal and social service systems? So just kind of thinking about how your clients or the people that you work with, how their past experience of oppression, whether it's at work, at the county, in the streets, how it impacts their abilities and their feelings about accessing supportive services that they need to be safe from abuse or to stop abusing if they're using abusive relationships themselves. And so, unfortunately, there are so many intersecting systems that are stacked against survivors that compound their traumatic experiences and often prevent them from being able to access support, advocacy, and healing, which we believe all survivors deserve. Take a breath. We'll start the slide with another multiple choice poll. So this is justification. We won't spend too much time on the slide, just again, for time's sake. But which of the following options in the poll have you heard being attributed to abuse? So while you're filling that out, I'll just chat for a little bit about how there are a lot of factors that contribute to domestic violence rates worldwide. And we've been intentional about making an important distinction here between factors that contribute to learning abuse is an effective way to get what you want, and factors that escalate existing abusive tendencies. Because again, correlation is not always causation. And so this distinction is important because often all of these are categorized under causes of domestic violence. And when we ask people who use abuse what directly leads to their behavior, it's the core belief that abuse is an effective way of getting what they want. And they can learn that as a child, as a teen, as an adult from their environment, including existing in cultures with strict gender roles and expectations that can be used for excusing and justifying abuse, and forms of media that display, model, and even promote abusive behaviors. So a really common misconception is that people who witness abuse as a child are destined to become abusers or victims themselves. And it's true that some children who witness abuse in their family grow up believing abuse is normal, acceptable, they perpetrate it themselves, but most don't. And similarly, a lot of people believe that those who perpetrate abuse have been abused themselves. And although, again, this is sometimes the case, it doesn't happen as often as we think. So also, since the start of the pandemic, domestic violence organizations like Women's Advocates has received a lot of questions about if COVID-19 is causing domestic violence, since it seems like more and more folks are experiencing and hearing about domestic violence. And similarly to the pandemic, there are factors that can escalate or exacerbate existing abusive tendencies, but it's not a cause, right? So everything on the right that you see aren't immediate direct causes of abuse, but they can exacerbate abusive tendencies that might already exist from more of the things on the left of that learned behavior. So go ahead and share the results. So a lot of people said that they have heard abuse being caused by the use of drugs and alcohol, and also that the abusive person had a bad childhood. So sometimes those are all used as justification for people's abusive behavior and saying, oh, well, it's because of this or that or anything else on the poll. But again, this is something that we want to start to chip away at some of those misconceptions and start to understand kind of the contributing factors and not kind of dismissing behaviors because of a bad childhood or because of the use of drugs or alcohol, saying that people need to take accountability for their actions, right? And that there might be things related to why they're doing what they're doing, but at the end of the day, it is a choice. So one of the reasons why domestic violence has been described as the invisible epidemic or the public crisis that happens in plain sight is because many of us have been conditioned not to recognize abusive behaviors as abuse. And so there are many social norms and also heteronormative beliefs that excuse abuse or lead us to expect it and accept it as regular parts of being in a relationship in today's society. And many of the examples of the ways that these norms show up, including jealousy, of saying like, including jealousy shows that this person cares for and loves their partner. That sentiment, again, as we've talked about, has been depicted in so many romantic songs, shows, movies, as something to look for evidence that someone cares, when in reality, the behavior can be a display of mistrust, insecurity, and the need for control. And so other examples that you see on the screen are also rooted in misogyny, patriarchal beliefs, acceptance of coercion, and show how many aspects of our culture maybe inadvertently devalue consent, respect, and agency. So again, back to the poll from the last slide, all those justifications for abuse can be refuted at the link at the bottom of the slide. For why none of those examples, again, the person struggling with their mental health, none of them are justifiable reasons to abuse. Again, domestic violence is always a choice. I sound like a broken record, but the only one responsible for the abuse is the person using it. And the core driving factor behind the abuse is the idea, the belief that the person has the right to control and instill fear in their partner. So there are also countless misconceptions about why survivors are unable to leave abusive relationships and situations. And these misconceptions stem from not understanding the very real barriers that exist as people who may have never experienced abuse. People who do not know what it's like to be faced with the choice of experiencing abuse or the danger that can come with being homeless, or being told that you would be breaking up the family and hurting your child if you got a divorce, or that if you stay, you're just as bad as the abuser. People who experience abuse are faced with often impossible and gut-wrenching set of decisions and barriers to navigate, oftentimes on their own and with very limited resources and support. And so this is why the reason why it takes survivors an average of 12 to 15 attempts to be able to successfully leave an abusive relationship. So it's important for us to know that there are an endless number of reasons for why staying might feel safer for a survivor in that moment, or why leaving would pose even more challenging, even more challenges that the survivor doesn't have the capacity to overcome. It's not our place to say what we would do in their situation or what they should have done to avoid experiencing abuse. Survivors deserve compassion and non-judgment. And even if a survivor leaves, again, as we've talked about with digital abuse, it does not guarantee safety. And again, in fact, leaving is the most dangerous time for survivors since it disrupts the power and control by the abusive person. And if leaving isn't fatal to the survivor, many experience long-lasting impacts from abuse or continue to abuse even after they've left, including abuse litigation or legal abuse, as we talked about earlier. There's a link on the screen too for 50 obstacles to leaving if you want to learn even more about those barriers. There's a really great kind of outline of it on the National Domestic Violence Hotline website. All right, so the next two slides are about the impact, and then hopefully we'll have some time to talk about everyday ways of supporting survivors. So the impact of domestic violence on a survivor is Something you can think of similar to that of an infection that has the potential of impacting all systems and all dimensions of a survivor's well-being, even after the abusive person has stopped abusing them. So today we'll focus on the long-lasting impacts of abuse on survivors' physical and emotional dimensions of wellness. People who experience abuse will carry it with them for the rest of their lives. There are many different ways that abusing or experiencing abuse can impact our sense of well-being and sense of self. So the impacts on physical and emotional health are intertwined. 84% of survivors are diagnosed with PTSD, which can cause traumatic nightmares, which can lead to insomnia. 77% of survivors are diagnosed with depression, and 75% of survivors are diagnosed with anxiety, which can manifest in the body as migraines, chronic pain in the chest, back, or pelvis, hyperventilation, and gastrointestinal symptoms like IBS. Experiencing harm from someone who is supposed to love you can significantly dysregulate all of our systems, the way that we think about ourselves, about the world, about our ability to concentrate, our memory, our ability to make decisions for ourselves and our life. The emotional scars from abuse are often discredited, but survivors tell us that long after bruises may heal, it takes an astronomical amount of patience, compassion, and professional and personal support, and much more to even begin to heal from the scars on the heart. So experiencing abuse can impact the type of job someone can have, the ability to trust someone in a new relationship that they pursue, their relationship with money. The effects of abuse show up in so many different ways, and it's important for us to understand that impact in order to truly be trauma-informed, which we'll talk about in this next section. Before I move on to this next section, any questions from anyone or any comments? Okay, so now that we know, and now we know what we know, and we can't unknow it, we'll think about what we'll do with this information moving forward. So we'll start with 2 scenarios. So we're trying to assess what we would actually do in both these situations. So the first is your friend Elijah and a guy she met at work, John, have been going out for a while. One day, John showed up at Elijah's school and saw her give a male friend a hug. John grabbed her arm and pulled her to his car, where he called her a slut and a cheater. If you saw this happen, what would you do? Would you tell Elijah that you were concerned about her and help her find advocacy resources? Would you tell another friend and hope that they would do something to help Elijah, or would you leave it alone? If Elijah didn't say anything to you, it's not your place to get involved. Maybe share in the chat A, B, or C, which one is closest to what you would do. Maybe you can explain why. You can tell us your thought process, any additional information you'd want to know, or questions you would ask and how those responses to those questions would inform your actions. Again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer here, just responses that would yield a more or less support to this person in this scenario. So people are saying A, they would tell Elijah that they're concerned and help her find advocacy resources, right? Others would ask if John has acted this way before. Others are saying whenever Elijah's ready, she'll have resources for support. Yeah, that's a really great option. Other people are saying they'd have to find what resources are available, and hopefully the next few slides will provide you with some starting points for what resources you can share. Other people are saying because you want Elijah to know that you are there for her and that if there's abuse, there are resources out there, right? So a lot of you would speak up. It's not uncommon for people to say, oh, just leave it alone. Like, it's not my place. Some people think like, oh, I don't want someone to think I'm meddling in their relationship, or other people would say, you know, hope that someone else would do something or would observe it. So that's great that a lot of you would actively kind of reach out and express your concern. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. One more scenario. So the next scenario is the following. Rebecca and Janet met at the mall. When they first began dating, Rebecca was very sweet. Over time, she started putting Janet down and once ended a fight by slapping her. Things got worse, and Rebecca told Janet if she ever left her, Rebecca would kill herself. If you knew about all of this and another friend asked you if you thought Janet was okay, what would you do? Would you tell them to stay out of it? They're both women. There's no such thing as an abusive LGBTQ relationship. You would pretend you didn't know and tell them to ask Janet directly. Or you would tell them you were also concerned about Janet and that both of you should go together to offer your help. Would you choose A, B, or C? Again, put it in the chat. Same request. Let us know why you would choose that option. Again, thought process. What would you want to know? What more information would you want to have? Okay. A lot of people are saying C. They would ask to go together and express concern. Great. I'm glad none of you put A because we did talk about how abuse does happen in every relationship and it does happen more, if not at the same rate as heterosexual relationships as well too. Yep, abuse can happen regardless of relationship dynamic. Great. So thank you for participating in that activity. And so now we'll kind of progress to giving you some concrete steps that you can consider taking the next time you may be interacting with someone who's experienced harm from someone that they care about. So this is the Blazer technique from our very own Ramsey County SOS Sexual Violence Services in St. Paul, which is another great resource for you all to have in your back pocket. This is an acronym that stands for believe, listen, affirm, support, empower, and refer. An important aspect of the Blazer technique is to center the survivor's agency in everything. So this means respecting how much they decide to share with you and when they choose to share it, and not pushing them for more information or to do more. So this means telling them maybe about the options that they have for next steps and resources, but not prescribing what they need to do. It means letting them know explicitly, saying, I believe you, letting them know that their feelings and their worries are valid and that they're not alone. If you're concerned that someone in your life is experiencing abuse, the most important thing you can do is to continue to be in their life. Stay connected. Even when you're frustrated or if you wish this person would just leave already, keep in touch compassionately. The survivor in your life would really benefit from demonstrations that they are worthy of love and respect, and that they know at least one person who is trustworthy. And not every conversation that you have should be about abuse or about your concerns for the person. They might just want someone who they can feel normal with, to crack jokes, to share meetings with, to go on a walk with. Those everyday connections can go a really long way. And so we'll close out the slide with a single choice poll. This is the very last poll of the webinar. Which from the Blazer technique, which action would you want to focus on improving the most the next time that you interact with the survivor? And one thing I'll say about the believe is that how underrated it is of saying, I believe you, is because a lot of times survivors are told no one's going to believe you. So if you say, I believe you, you're working already toward kind of dismantling and deconstructing all of the things that the abusive person has said about that person or to that person. And so you're disrupting that narrative and that voice in their head from their abuser. And so saying, I believe you can be very powerful. All right, so I'll go ahead and end the poll in 20 seconds. All right. So it looks like 29% want to work on listening. That's really great. Another 29% want to work on empowering. So again, you get to decide what you do. And then a couple others listen and refer as well. That's great. Thank you for doing that. So earlier, I mentioned trauma-informed. There are everyday ways that we can employ a trauma-informed lens and approach to our interactions with survivors and how we talk about survivorship when they're not there. There are 6 key elements that can go into this approach. So those include trust, safety, collaboration, choice, empowerment, and compassion. So looking at these 6 components, can you share a specific example of how you could or how you already do put these values into action, for how you would support a survivor in your life? So we'll take a few moments here to write those out in the chat. So maybe you can pick one of those elements and describe a specific action that you can see yourself taking. I'll wait for maybe 1 or 2 in the chat if we can get an example. Someone said empowerment. Yeah, is there a specific example of one way you can put that value into action? What would that look like in your work? Someone said safety by speaking about a safety plan with the survivor. Someone said trust. I can build trust by listening and supporting. Everything builds from trust of each other. Absolutely. Another said trust when someone tells me about their situation, regardless of how much I know about the details. Compassion as the effects continue. Focusing on letting the victim decide what is best for them, supporting them through that process. I think within compassion, I understand that missed appointments may happen and I will not hold that against someone. These are all really, really great examples. You're welcome to continue to brainstorm, but I have some ideas on this screen here too. So one thing on the screen you'll see next to trust is the acronym BRAVING. That's from Brené Brown, stands for boundaries, reliability, accountability, vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. So a lot of you might have confidentiality policies that you have to follow anyway, and that can start to build trust, but it can be, again, being reliable, like saying, doing what you say you're gonna do, can start to build trust with your clients and with the people that you're working with. There's a lot of other examples on the screen. Other people mentioned compassion, right? Creating space for grace and patience, mistakes and understanding, right? One example of collaboration could be, you said a goal of yours is to move into your own apartment in 2 months. What steps can I support you in taking to achieve that goal? Here are examples of some of the things I can do. So again, you're collaborating and letting them take the lead. You're not saying you have to do X, Y, Z, do it right now on this timeline. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to move into your own apartment, like working in a very collaborative manner. A really simple one too is choice. So even like the simple one we talk about sometimes is like asking them, do you want coffee or tea? Or just allowing them to continue to make choices and experience that, and make decisions for themselves. Because honestly, that's something that a lot of survivors are conditioned to not be able to do. So giving them space to do that can be really important. All right, so someone in the chat talked about safety planning. So safety planning sometimes can become a bit of a buzzword in the field, and sometimes we don't always take the time to break down what really goes into that and specific considerations for survivors. And at Women's Advocates, we emphasize the importance of holistic safety. And so we've already talked about how abuse impacts all dimensions of wellness, and all types of safety. Holistic safety includes physical, social, emotional, intellectual, digital, financial, and spiritual aspects of safety. So it's important that the safety plan addresses all of those dimensions. And sometimes when we're working with a victim survivor or supporting one as a friend, we spend most of our energy on helping the victim survivor achieve physical safety. So things like writing restraining orders, finding the safe shelter, walking through escape routes, and maybe even police reporting. As we discussed previously, abuse creates more than physical scars. And so for those of us who are advocates or survivor advocates, we need to think about our own holistic safety too. So you can learn more by downloading our personalizable safety plan worksheet. You can watch our All About Safety Planning webinar from our domestic violence community educator, Mary Beth, who was also a crisis resource advocate for 3 years. And so both links on the screen will be available when you receive the PDF slides. I'll also put them in the chat now. Here it comes. So those are the 2 links if you would like to learn more. And then just a couple final notes before we close out. So one reminder is that you have the ability to shift our culture from automatic victim blaming and minimizing the impact of abuse to centering validation, belief, and autonomy of survivors and valuing consent, respect, and compassion. So on the left are questions and phrases we often hear in our society that we use to talk about people who've experienced abuse, many of which are said directly to the survivor and can be a secondary experience of trauma. Sometimes that's what we hear from survivors too, is it's the initial event of harm is painful, but it's another unique kind of pain when you tell someone that you care about and that cares about you, something that's happened to you, and they minimize it, or they deny it, or they blame you for it. That is a really painful experience as well too. And so survivors can be greatly hurt by abuse, of course. Again, it's that disbelief and denial from loved ones. Once they learn of that abuse, that can hurt in that special way. So victim blaming often doesn't come out as only saying it's your fault, but sometimes it's less direct implications like, did you provoke them? Why didn't you leave? Are you sure that happened? Often those responses mimic the abuser's voice and prove to the survivor that the abusive person was right. And then on the right are questions and phrases that challenge the abusive person's voice and start to prove them wrong. Saying that people do care, people will listen and believe, people will stand by you and support you, especially when it's unbelievably difficult. So phrases like, you deserve love and respect, you're not responsible for what has happened to you. They all start to contribute to the empowerment of the survivor and the humanization of the survivor. So words and language are so powerful, so let's use them for good. And so people who use abuse have family, they have friends, they have coworkers. They're people too who are capable of being held accountable for their actions as much as they might try to avoid it. So statistically speaking, again, it's very likely that you have a survivor of abuse in your life, and it's equally as likely that you have someone in your life who uses abuse. And I say this not to scare you or to worry you, but because it's the reality that we're faced with. And it's another opportunity to support survivors through doing what we can, with responsibility where it belongs with the abusive person. And so people who use abusive behaviors need people in their life who can challenge those behaviors and the beliefs that fuel them. They need people who believe survivors, who set positive examples, who can remind them that their actions are a choice and that other people choose to behave differently. If you can be that person for someone, please consider it. There are 2 links on the screen, again, to more of those quizzes that can be used as tools. The Am I a Good Partner quiz is something that a potentially abusive person can use, again, to get outside perspective about their behaviors and how they may be abusive, even if they don't want to admit it. The other is your partner really changing quiz. That can be a tool for a survivor to use who may be considering leaving their abusive partner for maybe the 10th time. So as someone who works in domestic violence, my optimistic side calls on me to believe that just as abuse can be learned, it can be unlearned and replaced with healthy choices rooted in equality, respect, and compassion, but it won't happen on its own. And I realize we are at time, so you're welcome to look through, but this is kind of encouraging you to think about other ways that you can show up for victim survivors where you live and work, and how you can contribute to a culture of respect and consent. So I'm just going to get into some resources. On the left are Minnesota specific, but I also acknowledge that there's plenty of people on the call that might be outside of Minnesota. So there's a bunch of national and international links on the slide. And I mentioned a couple books throughout the presentation. Those are on this slide. There's a couple more on this list. I just put in the chat some more book recommendations if you want to continue learning. And then this is our information. You can be in contact with our crisis resource advocates. You don't have to live in Minnesota or any specific county to reach out to us. And I'll also put the safety planning worksheet link in the chat here. And then just take a moment to fill out this super quick survey. So just put it in the chat. It should only take you a few minutes, if not less. It's just a few questions. It really helps us out. And then lastly, just wanted to extend a lot of gratitude to all of you for attending the training today. Please follow us on social media if you'd like. We have an excellent communications coordinator that puts out really great content. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to help us get to 1,000 subscribers. And you can access our hundreds of webinars and educational videos. You can scan the QR code on the screen to access and download the PowerPoint right away. And we also encourage you to join our monthly listserv if you haven't already. So I'll go ahead and put some of those links in the chat here. And then if you'd like a certificate of attendance, you can manually fill in the date and your name. You can click on this link that I will also put in the chat. And you can have your certificate of attendance right away. So no need to email us. You can just download it and insert it yourself. Thank you all so much for being here. I'll stick around. If there's any specific questions, you can email me directly. I'll put my email in the chat. And again, I hope you have a fabulous Friday and rest of your weekend. Thank you so much again to Margaret and Coco for the interpreting.